Welcome to Lesson 16 in Through the New Testament in Ancient Greek for Absolute Beginners. My name is Helena Stay, and I'll be your guide as we read through the New Testament in its original, beautiful language, the language of ancient Greece, which coincidentally was called Helleniste. Because each lesson builds on previous lessons, please start with Lesson 1. In today's lesson, we're going to read through Matthew 7, verses 1 through 14, which is a continuation of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, specifically the part when he tells us not to judge others. He tells us to ask, seek, and knock, and he instructs us to enter and look for the narrow gate. The topics we're covering today are mainly review, but it's actually also going further into depth on these topics and just bringing them back to your memory. We're going to cover tenses, moods, and voices of verbs, a quick review of articles and personal pronouns, because I don't want to make this lesson too long, and a quick review of πᾶσα, pan, and πόλυς, and then we're going to introduce the word olίγos, which means a few. Let's get started with Matthew 7, verses 1 through 4. Me krínete, hina me krítheite, en hogar krímati krínete, krítheseste, kai en ho metro metrete, metrethesetai, humin. Tide blepes ta karphas, ta ento ophthalmo tu adelphou su, Tende en to so ophthalmo, dakon ou katanoies. Pos eres to adelpho su. Office ekbalo ta karphas ek tu ophthalmo su. Kai idu, he dakas en to ophthalmo su. All right, this slide looks a bit overwhelming, and it is. But I think it's a great way to summarize all of the different ways you can describe a verb in Greek. So we're going to talk about tense. We're going to talk about these moods, although these last two are more commonly or more appropriately called non-finite verb forms, and we'll talk about why. And then voice. All right, and this is the way they're organized in Bible Hub. You'll see verb, and then you'll see first the tense, so present is an example, and then you'll see the mood, which is an indicative is an example, and then you'll see the voice. And then you'll see the number, like first person, second person, or third, and whether it's singular or plural. So that's just an example. That's why I put them in this order. So PIA would be present, indicative, active. First person singular would be your person and number. But I think the best way to talk about them is first talking about this, and then talking about tense, and then talking about voice. Because the broadest category is your mood. All right, so a verb is going to be in one of these 6 different forms. It's either going to be indicative, subjunctive, optative, imperative, infinitive, or participle. All right, so a verb will be one of these 6 forms, and I have this little mnemonic device. I saw mnip. So I saw mnip. Not sure if that helps you, but isomnip will tell you the order. So let's talk about these. Indicative is pretty much all of what we usually use. All right. It's our objective reality. The speaker is in the mood to talk about reality. You can think of it like that. So I go to the store. I went to the store. I will go to the store. I was going to the store. I will have gone to the store. All those are indicative. All right. Those are things that actually you think are happening. So even if it's in the future, even if it might not happen, I will go to the store tomorrow. You are expressing the idea that it's happening. That's your plan. Now, the next one here, subjunctive, is used a lot more in ancient Greek than in English today. So this is an expression like if somebody is talking about hypothetical reality. If I go to the store tomorrow, I will buy tomatoes. So if I go to the store tomorrow is it kind of an expression that it might not happen, but it's hypothetical. And if it happens, then I'll do something else. So after if, sometimes you can use it when you have a word like so that, like I'll go to the store tomorrow so that I can get some things on sale. So you're not really sure if things are going to be on sale, but It might. So that, usually when you're expressing a goal or an intention, you would use the subjunctive in ancient Greek. And then also things like even if or whoever has, or whenever you see the word ever kind of in English, whoever, whatever, in ancient Greek, that would be followed by the subjunctive. So whoever, whatever, wherever, whenever, those types of words in ancient Greek, you're going to use the subjunctive. All right, optative we've talked about briefly in a previous lesson, but this is when it expresses a wish. So we don't really have this in English. We would just say, may it be that, whatever. Like, so in the Bible, we always see is, may it happen as you have described. That might be a reason to use the optative in that type of construction. And then imperative is pretty straightforward because we have these in English. The one thing is in Greek, you have them for second person, both singular and plural, and for third person, which we don't really have in English. We use something like let him go instead of like deliberately saying go to that third person. So it's a really kind of a strange concept for us, but we'll see some examples of second and third person commands in ancient Greek, and also for singular and plural. And then the infinitive, in English, we usually use this helper word to. So to be, and I'm just going to call it a verb noun, because it's basically like using a verb as a noun. So this idea, to be a parent, is wonderful. So it's kind of acting as the subject of this sentence. To be a parent is wonderful. So you're not talking about a parent is wonderful. You're talking about like being a parent. We also say being for another way of expressing it. That's the present participle, being, which we'll talk about over here. But that's another way we express verbs as nouns in English, is with this present participle, or even with a past participle. But to be, to go, to seek, those are all examples of infinitives. And in Greek, we have actually several tenses of infinitives, which is kind of strange. We don't do that in English. And then participles are what I would call a verb adjective. So adjectives are something that describes things. So being a teacher, so that is kind of like describing that you are a teacher, right? I'm being a teacher, or just being a teacher is a difficult thing. Or you could say something like having been a teacher. This is using the past participle. You're using having, which is a present participle of have, with the past participle of to be. So having been a teacher, I kind of know how 16-year-old boys act. So think of participles, which will make more sense as I go through them. Don't worry, don't give up. Think of participles as like verb adjectives that sometimes by themselves can act as nouns, called substantive use of the participle. All right, so now that we've talked about these broad categories of verbs, let's go ahead and talk about the tense. So within each of these categories, there are certain tenses that you can use. So we'll talk about indicative because that's the most common. So you can have indicative present, you can have indicative imperfect, you can have indicative aorist, future, perfect, and pluperfect. All right, so indicative is the broad category, and then these are the tenses within that. Not all of these different verb categories have all of the tenses. Indicative does. So let's talk about indicative. So in the present, this is either a general truth, like love is an amazing emotion. That is a general truth, and the verb is, in English, is in the present. So just like in Greek, the general truth is a reason to use the present. Obviously, now is kind of not necessary to explain. The present tense is for what's happening now. I am feeling good. That would be the use of the present tense of first person singular. I am. That was something that happens now. Now, future is sometimes used in present tense. So I work next week. Work by itself without will, I will work next week, is basically indicating that something will happen in the future, but you're just using present. It's pretty understood that by next week, you know that it's going to happen in the future. You can also just say I work, which is kind of ongoing present, but next week helps you know that you don't really have to say I will work next week unless you want to emphasize that. So ancient Greek is very similar. Imperfect is one of 4 different ways of expressing something in the past. So first there's imperfect. Second is aorist. Third is perfect. And fourth is pluperfect. So these different 4 ways are used for expressing something that happened in the past. Imperfect is ongoing. So you could say, I went to the park every day for years in English, But in Greek, you would use the imperfect. And it's the same thing as in English. We would say, I used to go to the park every day, or I was going to the park every day. So that's kind of how we express this imperfect idea. But in Greek, we have a specific tense for that. We don't actually use our past participle or our used to go. There's just one tense. All right. The second form of second tense form that is something that happened in the past is the aorist. And in Greek, this means it happened in the past and it's completed. So I went to the Grand Canyon last week. All right. You could say in the imperfect, I used to go to the Grand Canyon every summer. That would be ongoing or habitual. But with the aorist tense, it's just a one time usually. I mean, it could be multiple times, of course, but the emphasis is that it's already done. It's in the past. Complete. And this third way of expressing something that happened in the past in ancient Greek is with the perfect tense, which we have in English. We usually say have with the past participle, for example, gone. So in English, we use this differently. So let me explain how it's different. So if you say, I have gone to the Grand Canyon, the emphasis is on, yes, I have done that. I have washed the dishes. You want to emphasize that you've done it. But in Greek, the perfect tense is used to emphasize that it happened in the past and it resulted in a new state of being. All right. So the reason I would use the perfect, if I were an ancient Greek speaker, is to say, I have been washed. So now I'm clean. All right. So that's an example. In the Bible, you'll see a lot of use of the perfect to emphasize this new state. The new state is kind of the emphasis, as opposed to just saying that it has, it's kind of the same because you're emphasizing that it has been done, but you want to emphasize that something is different now as a result. And then finally, though, the last way you express a Greek past tense verb is with this pluperfect, which we also have in English. In English, you would say, I had gone. All right, so why would you say that? Well, you want to emphasize that it happened before another event. So for example, I had gone to the store before he told me what he needed. So basically, you told me too late. I had already gone to the store. You didn't tell me that you needed milk until after I got back. So I had already gone when he told me he needed milk. Okay, so that had is before. So with pluperfect, you know that it happened in the past, and the emphasis is that it's even earlier than another past event. So it kind of gives you an idea of where on the timeline something happened. If this is the present, if one event happened here in the past, and then the pluperfect happened even further back in the past compared to now. All right. And then we have our last one is the future, which should be obvious, is everything past now. All right. And that's pretty straightforward. So I won't spend too much more time on that. All right. So let's go ahead and talk about the last way to describe verbs. And this is, of course, besides person and number, which you also use to describe verbs. But the last one I want to focus on right now is voice. And this is basically describing whose voice it is or who is the subject, basically. So if it's the subject that's speaking or the one that's being described doing it, that's active voice. So I save money. And generally, it's going to be transitive. So transitive simply means that you have a direct object. I save money. All right. It's not just I save, it's I save money. All right. Now, sometimes when you say I save, you could also be referring to something that you save. Like, you know, somebody's talking about money and you say, oh, I save. So that would also be this type of active voice. It doesn't have to have a direct object, but one that's implied. And then middle tense is generally something that one does themselves. They don't need a direct object. So I save myself would be an example, or I go. You can't say I go money. You would say just I go. And it's understood that it's you who's going. You're kind of moving yourself. Lots of verbs like that in ancient Greek that are verbs of motion. And then also if you have studied any other languages, you know what a reflexive verb is when you like wash yourself. That would be another example of how ancient Greeks use the middle voice. All right. So it's the subject doing something to itself or just doing it without having a direct object. And without a direct object, that would be called intransitive. So I go is an example of intransitive verb. And lastly, there's passive. And that's when somebody else is doing the action to the subject. So I am saved. That's usually using like am in English, or he is saved, or he was saved, or he will be saved. Usually you're using the helping verb to be in English. But in Greek, there's actually a whole form that is just passive. It doesn't have to have this helping verb like in English with the, this is called the past participle. So to be plus a past participle is all we need with English. It's a little bit more complex in ancient Greek. All right, let's go ahead and move on and talk about the verses that we just read. Okay, so the verbs that we want to introduce in this lesson are very common in Greek, especially in the New Testament. Krino is the word to judge. Then metreo, notice, has this accented vowel right before the omega. That is a sign that it's a contract verb. In this case, it's an epsilon contract verb, and we'll talk a lot more about contract verbs in the future, but epsilon contract. And then we have the word, I love the sound, belepo. Belepo means I see. And katanoeo is another epsilon contract verb. We'll talk about why that is different from a regular verb a little bit this lesson, but definitely more in the future. And then we have ereo, which is I say. All right, there's a lot of other words. Some of the most common other alternative ways of saying I say is lego. So lego is more common, I think, but ereo is a different way. And then we have afiemi, which means I forgive. And it also means permit. So the way I think of it is kind of weird, like forgive and permit don't seem to be the same, but basically when you forgive someone, you have permitted them to do it. Not necessarily that you agree with what they did, but you're kind of letting go your feelings against them. So that's kind of how I remember that they both mean, afiemi means them both. And then ekbalo. Balo by itself is to throw. I throw a ball, for example. That's an easy way to remember it, ekbalo. But ek here, as you would imagine, is out. So if you're throwing something with ek, you're throwing it out or casting it out. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the verses. Here we have krinete, krithete, krinete again, and then kritheseste is another form. So you have all these different forms of krino. We have do not judge, which of course in English we would say with a not after the do, but do not judge, not judge. And because it's not indicative, it's actually, what is this M, that stands for is imperative. So because it's an imperative and not an indicative, it uses the negating word may, not oo. We'll see oo down here. Oo is only before indicative. That I there in the middle is for indicative. All right, so do not judge. Second person plural, present, imperative, active, do not judge. So that, or that, you will not be judged, or you should not be judged. Basically, what this is saying is if you judge others, then you're going to be judged. So here, this is A stands for aorist, because it comes in that first position. Then S is for subjunctive, and I think you may remember that after hina, you will usually use the subjunctive, because it's like so that it's like a goal type of idea. You will not be judged, and notice it uses may again because may is used with non-indicative verbs and subjunctive is not indicative. All right, so those are the forms. I'm not going to go into why the endings are the way they are, but notice that they're both second person plural, which makes sense because Jesus is talking here to a group of people. And then he says, with whatever verdict. Another way of thinking of this idea is, I think a better way of thinking it is like criteria. So, I judge people if they're being good. They're being good people and they're not hurting anybody else. And it doesn't matter what they think about God. Like that's a lot of people's criteria or krimati. So in ho, krimati, krinete, you will be judged. So basically, you could say, this is my criteria. So then God will actually use that same criteria to judge you. And are you ever perfectly good? Do you lie? Do you things that hurt other people? Yeah. Anyway, this is a very similar form to this one, but notice instead it's present, indicative, active. And this is one of those rare cases when you have the exact same spelling for the second person plural imperative present is the same as the indicative present. So with whatever verdict you judge, you will be judged. So here, this is kind of interesting because it's future. And now this is a good example of passive. So here's the FIP, the passive part, is to show that you're not doing the judging. It's you that's receiving the judgment. So you will be judged. And notice how this is este. Instead of the tau, you have the sigma theta. And also, another thing that I'm going to point out is this theta here with the theta eta. Usually that theta comes when you're talking about passive. So just think of theta as indicating passive. It's not always going to indicate passive, but when you see the theta in a verb, sometimes it means it's passive. And then the sigma is another little hint that indicates the future. Okay, so you usually have a sigma for future verbs, and you'll usually have a theta for passive verbs. Don't worry about remembering all these things. The more you see it, the more it'll make sense. All right, and with whatever measure you measure, metro should sound familiar. No, it's not the subway in Paris, although that's also another way of using that word. But here it's related to meter, your measurement. So measurement like meter. But metrete is the verb and metrath is the noun. All right, so whatever measure you measure, so another way of thinking of this is benchmark. Like, this is how I measure other people. This is the benchmark for being a good person. So whatever benchmark you use to measure other people, it will be measured to you. So metre thesitai, here a few things. That theta indicates passive, which it is. This sigma here indicates future, which it is. And then etai is a third person singular kind of sign. And we'll talk about that later. We did mention it in a few earlier verses, but etai is usually a third person singular ending for verbs. So it will be measured. We're not talking about you being measured, but your benchmark will be measured or will be used to measure you. So that's why it's third person singular and not second person. It's the benchmark that will be used to measure. All right, so next we have ti de blepes. Why now are you looking at ta karphos is a splinter, which is neuter. Ta, and now this ta is used to kind of connect karphos with what describes it after. In the eye of your brother. Okay, so it's in the eye of the brother your. This will get much easier as you read ancient Greek. And then in your own eye, you don't notice. Ou katanoies, you don't notice. And this is pia again, present, indicative, active, second person singular. Notice how he switched from talking to a group of people and then talking to one particular person, the one that's like trying to tell his brother to get that splinter out when there's one giant piece of wood, a big beam in your own eye. You don't notice. Katanoies with u in front of it to negate it. All right, and then how, pos eres, do you say to your brother, permit me to cast out the splinter from your eye? So here, office is imperative. It's like a command. And then I might cast out. This is a subjunctive. And so you're asking your brother to permit you to to cast out, basically, to take out his splinter from his eye. When behold, idu, this is another form of imperative. It's actually kind of an expression like we have in English, like look, behold, idu, look, there's a beam in your eye. So a lot of really great uses of verbs here, just to point out. And of course, we're going to go into a lot more detail in the future, so don't worry if this doesn't all completely click yet. All right, so quick review of articles. Here's my chart. The colors are just denoting where the former is the same. So masculine genitive singular is the same as neuter genitive singular. And all of the genitive plurals are the same across the genders. And then we have toe and toe, and we have tois and tois. And finally, you notice that neuters are going to be the same in the nominative and accusative, both in the singular and in the plural. So here are all the articles. Notice that the case should help you to determine their use. Here, we don't know if this is nominative or accusative because it's the same in the neuter, but because you look at the splinter, they say it's accusative here because it's the object of looking. And then that is in your eye. So ta connects the karphos with a description of it. And then in the eye, so because it's after n, it becomes dative. of your brother, so that's going to be genitive. And then this tain here is a little confusing at first because you're like, what does that belong to? Until you notice on the next line, we have a beam, which is feminine, all right? Accusative feminine. So this tain belongs to beam, and then sandwiched in between here, you have something describing the beam, which is in your own eye beam. So in English, literally, it would be the and in your own eye beam you don't notice. So it's kind of a little weird in Greek, but you'll get used to it the more you read it. All right, and then to the brother is going to be to, because that's dative. And then cast out the splinter, again, we have ta. In this case, it's accusative, though it looks like nominative. From the eye is going to be genitive after ek. And then the beam, because it's feminine and it's nominative, notice it changes to tain when it's accusative. He dakos and to ophthalmo. So after in, we have dative again. All right, that was a really quick review of our articles. All right, really quick review of personal pronouns. Here's my complex table, which has become more complex because now I have first person, second person, and then all these are third person. Notice how first and second person don't have any different forms for the genders. So whether you're a male or a female, you use the same word for I and the same word for you and so forth. And then your third person will have different forms for different genders, except masculine and neuter share some of the same forms here. And then masculine, feminine, neuter all share the genitive plural autone. So without going, I'm not going to repeat all of those. I just want to point them out. So of you, here is Sue. Again, again, and again. This is actually more like an adjective. So that's why I colored it this jade color for my adjective colorations. All right, so let's go ahead and read Matthew 7, verses 5 and 6. Hupakrita, ek bale proton ek tu ophthalmou su tain dakon, kai tate diablepses ek balein ta karphos ek tu ophthalmou tu adelphou su. Me dote ta hagian tois kusin, mede balete tus margaritas humon emprasthen ton koiron, me pate kata patesusin autus en tois pasin auton, kai straphentes reixosin humas. All right, so just a few other verbs I want to point out. We already saw ekbalo, so I won't repeat this, but this is to cast out or to throw out or to take out. Diablepo. So blepo by itself means I see. Diablepo. Remember, dia here either means through or by, but I think through is probably a good explanation because you're actually seeing it really clearly, almost like you're seeing through it. It's so clearly. So diablepo is to see clearly. And then a strangely formed irregular verb is didomi, which is kind of an older form of Greek. And that one means to give. So to give, very common. So even though it's irregular, we're going to have to remember it. Balo, of course, is to throw or to cast. Kata pateo. This one, pateo means to walk on or to tread on. Kata usually means under. So this is like to tread something under your feet. So to trample. Trample would be a good explanation. To trample. And then we have strafo, which means to turn. Strafo. And then reso. Reso with a little trill because it has that hard. Reso. And reso means to tear. Kind of like that word is what's used when Jesus talks about tearing an old wineskin, for example. All right, so let's go ahead and look at these. So cast out here, we know this is going to be an imperative mood with the M. Aorist is your first A. So it's aorist, imperative, active, second person singular. So it's an imperative. Jesus is saying, take out the beam from your eye first, proton, just like what's in the center of atoms. And then, kaitate, diablepses, you will see clearly. Notice they use this ps, psi, that is a combination of P and S, like in psychology. So the P and the sigma become psi. All right, so diablepo, with just the P or the pi, combines with the sigma that's used to make the future, and it becomes ps. All right, so that's kind of like showing you have a sigma that should indicate to you that that's a future. And then ace is usually the ending for second person singular. Here, this is indicative. So Jesus is saying, you will see clearly. I'm stating it as something that's objectively true. To cast out. So you see clearly enough that you can cast out. So ekbalein here, this N means infinitive. Now this is another use of an infinitive, and it's not exactly acting like a noun here, but it's acting more like as something that results from something else. So you will see clearly, and then to cast out, in order to. A lot of times you use infinitives to complete other verbs, like I have the power to cast out the splinter. That would be another way they use it in ancient Greek. But here it's you will see clearly to cast out, kind of like a goal that you want to have. Like once you see clearly, you're able to achieve the goal of casting out the splinter. So this is why it's aorist, infinitive, active. And with infinitives, notice there's no person or number. All right, so then we have the I of the brother of you. Here's dote. In this case, it's aorist, subjunctive, active, second person plural. So do not give that which is holy. So ta hagion. Here we use, instead of the imperative as you would expect, this is actually a subjunctive. And you can use the subjunctive for a negative command in Greek. So with negative commands, like do not do something, you can use either may with the imperative or may with the subjunctive. It's kind of either or in ancient Greek. But with a positive command, like give something holy to blah, 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 then you would always use the imperative, not the subjunctive, only for negative commands. All right, and then here again, we have the subjunctive, nor cast out. Again, this is a use of a command. With mayde, instead of saying and not, you just say mayde, balete. And then margaritas, just pointing out that means pearls. I don't know if you knew what the original source of the word margarita was. It's not a drink, no, and it's not a flower, and it's not a woman. So there you have it. And then lest, interesting, they trample upon. This word is kind of an indication that you would use a subjunctive or something in the future. So Jesus is making this clear that they will trample on it. If you give something holy to pigs, they're not going to appreciate it. They will trample on it. He could have also used a subjunctive in this case because it's something that might happen in the future. But using the future is more, Jesus is expressing more certainty here, I think. So future, indicative, active, third person plural. Katapate susim. And notice this sigma here is kind of an indication that it's future. We'll go into more detail about the forms of the future, but susim. Also, this eta here indicates it's a contract verb. And again, don't worry if you don't understand what I'm talking about, but katapateo, usually you'll have an eta when you're conjugating. Under their feet. And then here, strafentes. This one is a participle. So here we have, it's a aorist participle passive, and it's nominative masculine plural. So it's talking about the subject. It's describing the subject. Aorist is basically indicating that it happened in the past. So it's describing the pigs. Okay, the pigs are masculine, genitive masculine plural here, and they become the subject here. They tear you to pieces. So having turned, strafentes, reixosin humas. Now this case here is a subjunctive use. So now they tear you to pieces. This is more better translated. They may tear you to pieces. They might tear you to pieces because it's subjunctive and not future. But that's just my personal opinion. I'm not the best expert, but I think that this is, they might tear you to pieces. So they're definitely going to trample on the things that the holy things that you show to them, but they might tear you to pieces as a result. All right, and then just a quick review of personal pronouns again from these verses. We've seen Sue, Sue. Those should be common, so pretty obvious to you. Those are genitive, second person singular. This one here, humon, the upsilon with the rough breathing mark is going to be you, second person plural, humon. Whereas hamon with an eta is going to be our. So look for that eta indicating first person versus the upsilon, which is going to indicate second person. Hamon, humon, hames, and I have them all over here in this area. So you'll see the hames, hamon, hamin, hamas versus humes, humon, humin, humas. So that's us and you. Okay, and obviously we is the nominative. We do have different forms for the different uses in English. That's kind of cool to see that comparison there. Not quite as complex as Greek though. All right, and then auton is the genitive plural for all three genders. And humas is the accusative for the second person plural. All right, let's go ahead and read verses 7 through 11. Aitete kai dothesetai humin, zetete kai huresete, cruete kai anoigesetai humin, pasgar ha eton lambane, kai ha zeton huriske, kai ton cruanti anoigesetai, etis estin ex humon anthropos, han etesai ha huias autou arton, me lethon epidose auto, e kai ichthun aitesai, me often epidose auto, e un humes, pane roi antes, oidate domata agatha, didanai tois technois humon, paso malan, ha pater humon, ha en tois uranois, dose agatha, tois aitusin auton. All right, so in these verses, the verbs I want to point out are aiteo. Notice, what is this? Do you remember what it's called? Epsilon contract verb. And then our friend didomi, which is to give. Epididomi has didomi plus this little epi, which means on. So epi will give him, it's probably more personal to really give someone something specifically, epididomi. I'm sure there's some examples of how that differs from didomi, but kind of almost equivalent. Lambano is receive, to receive. Zeteo, another epsilon contract verb, is to seek, I seek. Heurisco, actually this should have backward. Sorry, that is an error. That should be a rough breathing mark, so it's heurisco, as to find. And then cruo, knock, or to bang, or to kind of slap, I guess you might say, to hit. And then anoigo, that is to open, or I open. So let's see how they're used here. Ask, this is an imperative. Lots of imperatives here. Second person plural. Ask and it will be given. That's future, indicative, passive. So it's this third person singular object, whatever it is you're asking for, will be given. That's passive, will be given to you. Zetete, that's again, present, imperative, active. Seek, second person plural, talking to a group of people. And you will find. Huresete. Notice with heurisco, you don't have the kappa there. So it's a little bit, it's going to be a little bit irregular. But you do have a sigma to indicate its future. Sigma is generally a clue that you're talking about the future, and we'll get more into that later. Cruete, knock, this is going to be imperative again, and it will be open to you. And notice again, just like here, we're talking about a third person singular object, probably the door. So if you knock on a door, it will be opened to you. So third person singular, future indicative passive. And then πᾶσα, everyone, gar, for everyone who is asking. Here we have present participle, active. In English, usually ing will indicate a present participle. Lambane, present indicative active. So anyone who's asking receives. And the one who is seeking finds. These are this is another present participle with the ing, the one seeking. Notice in this case, you could use this as, the person seeking, but you could also just say the seeking. And in Greek, that would just be a noun. You turn the adjective into a noun. The one who is seeking finds, PIA, present indicative active, heuriske. And to the one, so notice this is in the dative, knocking, another present participle, kruanti. This guy is the dative form of usually the nominative is own of a present participle, and then the dative will have like onti. It will be opened. Again, another future indicative passive, third person plural, just like we saw above here. And then here we have or, which of you men has a son who asks him for bread, who will ask him for bread. This is a little strange construction here. So of which of you a man whom your son, the son of you, will ask for bread. So a little strange, it's a little more complicated than we use, but here we have future indicative active, FIA, iteisai. And this epsilon contract verb turned into an eta, and then we have the sigma, which indicates future. Ha huia sautu. So which of you your son will ask for bread? We'll give him a stone. So why would you give your son who's asking for bread a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, you will give him a serpent. So will ask for, iteise again, and then will give, epidose. Will give him a serpent. So basically, why would you give your son a stone if he asks for bread? Why would you give your son a serpent if he asks for a fish? So if, therefore, you, humes, that's our nominative second person plural, personal pronoun, being evil, okay, so the ing indicates to us that we have a present participle here. So being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children. Here, oidate is perfect. It's a little complicated why it's perfect, but basically it comes from the idea that you have learned something in the past and now you know it. So it's kind of a current state of having learned. So know to give, here's our infinitive. And again, I just want to point out this R is perfect indicative active. So you know to give good gifts, tois teknois humon, to your children. How much more your Father in heaven will give, future indicative active, will give. And the sigma here is kind of a clue that it's future. Good things to those asking him. And then here we're talking about people who are asking. So this is a substantive use of your present participle. So dative masculine plural, usin. So aiteo with usin. All right, so again, don't worry if you don't understand all these different verbs forms. I'm just pointing them out to you so you can kind of get an idea of how they're used within these verses. All right, so just point out quickly the personal pronouns in here. So to you is humin, that's plural. So that's humin, which you can find over here, to, for you all. Humon is your, plural. So your all's plural. And then out of all of you. So that's why it's genitive, it's following X. And notice how ek becomes X before a vowel. And then to him, auto. All right, and it's not the neuter because you're talking about your son. And then we have, we'll give to him again, it's the same. Humes here is nominative second person. Humes is you all as the subject. You all, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children. And then your father, also the father of all of you, more than one person. And then lastly, we have to those asking him. And when you ask, after ask, aiteo, you use accusative. So that's why this is in the accusative describing the father. So auton. So our last verses for this lesson are Matthew 7, verses 12 through 14. Pantaun, pᾶσα eion thelete, hina poiosin humin, hoi anthropoi. Hutos kai humes poiete autois, hutasgar estin, hanamas kai ha prophetai. Eis elphate dia tes stenes poules, hati plateia he poule, kai euru koros he hadas he apagusa eistain apoleon. Kai paloi asin hoi ace erkamenoi diautes. Hati stene he poule kai tethlimene he hadas he apagusa aistain zoain. Kai oligoi asin hoi huriscantes autain. All right, the last thing I want to talk about is the use of πᾶσα, the use of πόλυς, and the use of ολίγος in these verses, though I really don't want you to miss out on this being the golden rule here. So let's just go ahead and look at this. Pantaun, pᾶσα eion thelete, hina poiosin humin, hoi anthropoi. So let's say here, so as therefore, whatever or as many things that you want men to do to you. And notice this is subjunctive because you want these things. It doesn't mean they're actually going to happen, that you want them to do. So in English, we might say that they should do to you, or that they might do to you, or that they may do to you. So whatever you want men to do to you, so also you should do, it's imperative, you do to them. And this is the law and the prophets. This is basically summarizing all of the laws of God in the Old Testament are summed up in this rule, to do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. All right, so this panta emphasizes everything that you want them to do to you. Panta, all things. Let me just show you our chart. All right, so this is our chart for πᾶσας πᾶν, and you can see here that we're talking about the accusative neuter plural, panta. So all things would be plural. It's the same as the nominative. The next thing is paloi, but let's first read this. This is an imperative, right? He wants you to enter. Enter, talking to a lot of people, through the narrow gate. So this is feminine, poules, narrow, stenes, tes, stenes, poules. For hati, the gate is wide, plateia he poule. For wide is the gate and broad is the way leading to destruction, apoleion. Leading to is going to be accusative. So, and paloi, many are, here's our ami. Just remind you, the verb ami is I am. Ami, and then it's conjugated ami, and then the third person plural is asin. So many are those entering, present participle, through it. For small is the gate, and compressed, pretty much like narrow, I think is a better way to say it, is the way that is leading to life. Tain zoain. Kai oligoi. So as opposed to poloi, many, oligoi is few. So you could think of oligoi like oligarchy is government by a few, so oligos. And then I have a chart showing you guys this. Polus, remember we talked about before, has a little bit of a strange, instead of one lambda, it goes to two lambdas, but these are the ways that you form polus. And then oligos is similar to other adjectives with this oligos, olige, oligon, Oligu, oligase, oligu, very similar to our definite article. Oligo, olige, oligo. Oligon, which is the same as the neuter. So notice oligon here is the same as oligon here, which is the same as the accusative. So you need the context to tell you what that oligon would be. And then oligoi, which is what we have here. Few, find it. And then oliga, if you're talking about just females, and oliga, if you're talking about neuter objects. And then oligon, 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 oligois, oligais, oligois, and then oligas, oligas, oliga. Notice these are also going to be the same. So those are two different adjectives that you'll see quite a bit in the New Testament. And it also helps you understand how you would, this is called declining, how you would decline similar adjectives. All right, that is the end of lesson 16. I am so glad that you joined us. And again, just keep with us. It'll get easier and it will become much more recognizable as we go forward, especially as we get through the entire New Testament, however long that takes us. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.